I've always prided myself on being a man of routine, a creature of habit. My life was a well-oiled machine, and I liked it that way. Each day began the same. I'd drop Carrie at school, head to the dealership, and dive into the sea of negotiations and contracts that defined my work. Selling used cars wasn't glamorous, but I was damn good at it, and my reputation spoke for itself. Jenna, my wife of 14 years, complemented my life perfectly, or so I thought. She was poised, confident, and organized, the glue that held our family together. We weren't the flashy type, we didn't need to be. Our joy came from the simple things: Saturday dinners, family movie nights, the annual road trip upstate. It was enough. Or at least, I thought it was. The cracks started to show in small, almost imperceptible ways. Jenna had grown distant over the past few months. She spent more time out of the house, meetings, she claimed. Her once effusive warmth had turned cool, her laughter infrequent. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She'd mentioned work had been demanding lately. But as the weeks turned to months, my gut began whispering a darker truth. I ignored it. Who wants to believe their world is crumbling? I convinced myself I was imagining things, that the late nights and unexplained absences were just the price of modern life. That is, until that Tuesday night at the diner. I was sitting in my usual booth, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing inventory spreadsheets, when the conversation in the next booth caught my attention. At first, it was background noise, two men swapping stories. But then I heard her name. Jenna. My Jenna. Man, I can't believe you've been pulling this off, one voice said, chuckling. I've got it down to a science, the other replied. I froze. I knew that voice. It was George, my best friend since high school. Kurt's as clueless as they come. Seriously, the guy wouldn't notice if I walked right into his house wearing her lipstick. The air seemed to thicken around me. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear more. You're really messing around with Jenna? The first guy asked. Yeah, for a while now, George said casually, like he was discussing the weather. I mean, she's the one who keeps it going. Says I make her feel alive or some crap like that. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd just heard. Could it really be true? George, the guy who had stood by my side as I said my vows, the guy I trusted more than anyone outside my family, was betraying me in the most unimaginable way. I didn't confront them. What would I say? What could I do that wouldn't make me look like a fool in a public place? Instead, I paid my bill and walked out, barely registering the cold night air as I stumbled to my car. The drive home was a blur. Anger, disbelief, and heartbreak churned inside me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this go. I needed proof, solid evidence, something Jenna couldn't deny or twist. Jenna was in the living room when I walked in, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. She looked up and smiled, but her eyes didn't hold the warmth they used to. Hey, how was your day? She asked. I mumbled a reply and headed upstairs, my thoughts racing. That night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I crept out of bed and grabbed her phone. It was locked, but I knew her passcode, Carrie's birthday. My hands trembled as I typed it in. The phone was clean, almost too clean. No incriminating texts or photos, no suspicious calls. It was as if she knew someone might be looking. Frustrated, I set the phone back down and stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying George's words over and over. The next morning, I took action. I installed a tracking app on Jenna's phone, something discreet that would run in the background. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I needed answers. If she was innocent, I'd feel like a fool, but at least I'd have peace of mind. If she wasn't, well, I'd deal with that when the time came. The app didn't take long to reveal the truth. Over the next week, I tracked her movements. Work meetings, she said. But her location data told a different story: hotel parking lots, quiet neighborhoods, places that had no connection to her job. Then, one Friday evening, the app sent me a notification. Jenna was at a motel on the outskirts of town. I drove there, my heart pounding, hoping against hope that there was some reasonable explanation. But as I sat in my car, watching her walk into the motel with George, all hope vanished. I stayed in the parking lot for what felt like hours, my mind a storm of rage and despair. Confronting them then and there would have been satisfying, but it wouldn't solve anything. I needed a plan, a way to not only expose their betrayal but ensure they paid the price. When Jenna finally came home late that night, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped into bed quietly, her perfume carrying a scent I didn't recognize. It was the smell of lies and betrayal, and it filled me with resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days following my discovery were the longest of my life. Every glance, every smile from Jenna, felt like a dagger to my chest. She acted as if nothing was wrong, as if our marriage was still intact, and the weight of her betrayal grew heavier with each passing moment. But I didn't let on. I played my role, the unsuspecting husband, while carefully constructing my plan. The first step was to protect Carrie. No matter how much anger boiled inside me, she was my priority. She was 13, old enough to sense when things weren't right, but young enough to need shielding from the full brunt of what was happening. For her sake, I needed to tread carefully. That weekend, Jenna mentioned a work retreat scheduled for the following week. It wasn't even subtle, her tone was casual, her lies so practiced it almost sounded natural. "It's at the Hilton downtown," she said, not even looking up from her coffee. "I'll be back by Sunday." I nodded, hiding my fury behind a neutral mask. "Sure. Let me know if you need anything." "Oh, I've got everything covered," she replied, her smile disarming. If only she knew how thin her cover was. By the time she left for her so-called retreat, my preparations were well underway. I started with our finances. I wasn't about to let Jenna walk away with the fruits of my hard work. Over the years, I'd built a successful dealership, turning a small lot into a thriving business. I'd also amassed a decent savings, which Jenna had full access to through our joint accounts. That was about to change. First, I set up a private trust in Carrie's name, transferring most of our liquid assets into it. The money would be safe there, untouched by Jenna or her potential legal claims. Next, I updated my will, ensuring that Jenna wouldn't see a cent if things went south. Finally, I began transferring ownership of key dealership assets to my brother, at least on paper. It was all above board, legal, airtight, and necessary. The next step was evidence. The tracking app on Jenna's phone had already given me more than enough proof of her infidelity, but I needed something concrete, undeniable. That's where Eric came in. Eric Cook was a private investigator I'd worked with once before. Back then, it had been a routine background check for a new hire. This time, the stakes were much higher. "I need you to follow my wife," I said when we met at his small office downtown. Eric, a wiry man with sharp eyes, nodded without hesitation. "What are we looking for?" "Evidence. Meetings, phone records, photos. Whatever you can get." Eric raised an eyebrow. "This about an affair?" I nodded. "Her and my best friend." "Ouch," he said, leaning back in his chair. "That's a rough one. Don't worry, though. I'll get you what you need." Within days, Eric delivered. Photos of Jenna and George together at the motel, timestamps from her frequent visits, and even receipts showing she'd been covering for him financially during their escapades. The evidence was damning, more than enough to confront her, or destroy her, if it came to that. The final piece of my plan was the setting. I didn't want a quiet, private confrontation. Jenna and George had humiliated me, and I wanted the truth to come out where it would hurt the most. That's when inspiration struck, Carrie's upcoming birthday party. It wasn't an easy decision. Part of me balked at the idea of using such a special day for something so vindictive. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The party would ensure that everyone who mattered, friends, family, even George's wife, Anita, would be there to witness the fallout. I poured my energy into planning the party, making sure every detail was perfect. Jenna was enthusiastic, offering suggestions and helping with the decorations. Her excitement made my stomach churn, but I played along. Let her think everything was normal. It would make the reveal all the more satisfying. The guest list was carefully curated. Close family and friends, a few of Carrie's classmates, and Anita, George's unsuspecting wife. Inviting her wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She deserved to know the truth as much as I did. The night before the party, I barely slept. My mind raced with anticipation, dread, and a sick sort of satisfaction. By morning, I was calm, my resolve solidified. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward. Jenna was in high spirits as the guests began to arrive, greeting everyone with her usual charm. George showed up an hour in, his arm around Anita, acting like he didn't have a care in the world. The sight of him made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. The party went off without a hitch. Carrie was thrilled, surrounded by friends and laughter. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. She didn't deserve to have her day overshadowed by the chaos I was about to unleash. But I reminded myself this wasn't about her. It was about Jenna and George. About justice. As the cake was brought out and everyone gathered around, I took the microphone. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. Thank you all for being here to celebrate Carrie's special day, I began, glancing at Jenna. She smiled, oblivious. But before we continue, I have something important to share. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelopes. One by one, I handed them out to the adults in the room, each containing a selection of the evidence Eric had gathered. I wanted to take this opportunity to shed some light on a betrayal, I said, my gaze locking with Jenna's. Her smile faltered, confusion and fear flickering across her face. Not just to me, but to all of us who believed in the people we thought we knew. I turned to George. That includes you, buddy. You, who I trusted with my life. Anita's expression shifted as she opened her envelope. Her face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth as she read the contents. Jenna's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. What is this? She stammered, her voice shaking. This, I said, my voice cold and steady, is the truth. The truth about you and George. The truth about every lie, every betrayal. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone like a storm. Jenna looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't flinch. This was the reckoning they both deserved, and I wasn't about to let them off easy. The room was a sea of chaos. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs into gasps. Faces that moments ago had been smiling and enjoying the celebration now twisted in shock and disbelief. Some guests looked down awkwardly, others stared directly at Jenna and George, their eyes heavy with judgment. Jenna's face drained of color. She clutched the envelope, her trembling hand struggling to hold the damning photographs and receipts steady. George, on the other hand, froze in place, his smirk from earlier replaced by a mask of sheer panic. His wife, Anita, had already stood up, her expression one of pure fury. What the hell is this, George? Anita hissed, holding up one of the photos like it was a poisonous snake. Wait. Anita, I can explain, George stammered, his voice barely audible over the growing murmur of the crowd. You can explain? She snapped, her voice rising. Explain how you've been sneaking around with your best friend's wife. At a motel, no less. Jenna tried to step forward, her lips quivering as she turned to me. Kurt, It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. I interrupted, my voice calm but laced with venom. You've been sleeping with George for months, Jenna. Don't insult everyone's intelligence by pretending otherwise. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out toward me. I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how. Oh, you were going to tell me? I shot back, taking a step closer to her. When, exactly? Before or after you planned your next work retreat with him? The guests were now fully engaged in the spectacle, their earlier awkwardness replaced by morbid fascination. Anita's anger bubbled over as she grabbed George's arm, shaking it violently. You smug bastard, she spat. You've been lying to me, lying to all of us. And you were so damn proud of it, weren't you? Anita, please, George pleaded, trying to pull her aside, but she wasn't having it. She shoved him backward, nearly toppling him into the snack table. Jenna turned back to me, desperation in her voice. Kurt, I made a mistake. Please, don't do this here. Not in front of everyone. I tilted my head, feigning consideration. Oh, now you're worried about appearances. That's rich, Jenna. You weren't concerned about appearances when you were sneaking off to motels or lying to our daughter about why you were late. Carrie. Her name hit me like a hammer. For a moment, the weight of the scene collapsed on me. She was still outside with her friends, oblivious to the explosion happening inside. I silently thanked God for that small mercy. Anita wasn't done. You're disgusting, she said, shoving George again. You threw away everything we built for what? For this? That stung Jenna. I'm not this, Anita, she shot back, her voice breaking. You're worse than this, Anita snapped. You're a liar, a cheater, and pathetic. I trusted you, Jenna. I trusted you with my family, and this is how you repay me. Jenna broke into sobs, burying her face in her hands. The sight would have softened me once, but not now. Not after the months of lies, the betrayal, the humiliation. Enough, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. This isn't about pity, and it's not about excuses. It's about accountability. Jenna, you made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. Jenna looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Kurt, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything. No, Jenna, I interrupted, my voice cold and firm. There's no fixing this. You didn't just cheat. You lied, you betrayed, and you made a fool out of me in front of everyone we know. There's no coming back from that. I turned to George, who was still cowering under Anita's wrath. And you, I said, my voice sharp. He flinched. You're no friend. You're a coward and a parasite. Get out of my house. Now. George hesitated, looking between me and Anita. Kurt, man, Now. I roared, taking a step toward him. He grabbed Anita's arm, but she yanked it away. You can leave, she said through gritted teeth. But you're not taking me with you. Or anything else. Defeated, George slinked out the door, his head hanging low as the whispers of the guests followed him like a trail of shame. Jenna stood frozen, looking around the room as though searching for an ally. None of the guests met her gaze. Her shoulders slumped, and she turned back to me. What about us? She whispered. I sighed, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. There is no us, Jenna. You ended at the moment you let him into your life, and into our bed. With that, I turned to the guests. Thank you all for coming. The party is over. Please see yourselves out. People shuffled awkwardly, murmuring their goodbyes. Some tried to offer comforting words, but I waved them off. I wasn't ready for sympathy. I wasn't ready for anything except getting Jenna out of my house. As the last guest left, Anita lingered by the door. She looked at me, her anger softening into a kind of shared sadness. "If you need anything, Kurt, anything at all, let me know." "Thanks, Anita," I said. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this." "Don't be. It's better to know the truth, no matter how ugly." With that, she walked out, her head held high despite the tears in her eyes. When the door closed, I turned to Jenna, who was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. "You need to leave," I said firmly. She looked up at me, pleading. "Kurt, where will I go?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said, my voice hard. "Pack your things. I want you gone by morning." Jenna opened her mouth to protest but thought better of it. She nodded silently and headed upstairs. As I stood there in the now empty living room, the silence felt deafening. The weight of what had just happened settled on me, but so did a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free of lies, of betrayal, of pretending everything was okay. This wasn't the end I'd imagined for my marriage, but it was the one I deserved. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Jenna was gone. True to my demand, she had packed her belongings and left while I slept. A note was on the kitchen counter, scrawled hastily in her familiar handwriting. "Kurt, I'm sorry for everything. I'll never stop loving you. Please tell Carrie I love her too. Jenna." I stared at the note for a long time, torn between anger and a hollow sadness. Her departure should have brought closure, but instead, it felt like the beginning of something heavier, darker. Carrie returned later that morning, oblivious to the storm that had upended our lives. I did my best to keep things normal, but she noticed Jenna's absence almost immediately. "Where's Mom?" she asked, her bright eyes searching mine. "She had to go away for a little while," I said, my voice steady. "She'll explain everything to you soon." Carrie nodded, accepting the answer for now. I couldn't bear to tell her the truth, not yet. It would shatter her world, and I wanted to give her just a few more days of innocence. For the next week, I tried to pick up the pieces. I threw myself into work, buried in paperwork and customer interactions that required just enough energy to keep me distracted. But at night, the silence of the house crept in. The emptiness where Jenna's presence once filled the space was suffocating. I didn't hear from her again. No calls, no texts. She seemed to vanish, as though she had never existed. Then, 2 weeks later, the phone call came. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was in the living room, flipping through TV channels mindlessly. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Kaminsky?" a voice asked, unfamiliar and clinical. "Yes, this is Kurt. This is Detective Harris with the Silver City Police Department. I'm sorry to inform you, but your wife, Jenna Kaminsky, was involved in an accident." The room spun. "What? What kind of accident?" "She was struck by a vehicle late last night. She didn't survive. I'm very sorry for your loss." The words hit me like a freight train. My knees buckled, and I sank into the couch. "Are you sure it's her?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes, sir. We identified her through her belongings. We'll need you to come down to the station to confirm, but there's no doubt." I barely remembered the rest of the conversation. The details blurred together, something about a crosswalk, a distracted driver. None of it made sense. None of it felt real. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. Jenna was gone. The woman who had betrayed me, the woman I had cast out of my life, was gone forever. And with her, the possibility of resolution, of answers, of closure. The days that followed were a haze. Telling Carrie was the hardest thing I've ever done. Her tears, her confusion, her devastation, each one felt like a dagger in my heart. She wanted answers I couldn't give her. Why wasn't her mother at home? Why had she been out so late? Why hadn't I brought her back? I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Not about the affair, not about the betrayal. It felt cruel to tarnish her memory when she was already gone. The funeral was a somber affair. Anita attended, offering quiet support. George was conspicuously absent, though I knew he was grieving in his own way. The guilt must have been eating him alive, but I didn't care. He didn't deserve my pity. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of Jenna's death pressed down on me. The anger that had once fueled me was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. I'd wanted revenge, but I hadn't wanted this. She was supposed to live with the consequences of her choices, not be erased from existence. Late one night, as I sat alone in the living room, a thought occurred to me, one I had been avoiding. What if I had handled things differently? What if I had confronted her privately, given her a chance to explain, to atone? Would she still be alive? Would we have found a way to co-parent, to move forward? The what-ifs were endless, and they tore me apart. One day, while cleaning out her closet, I found a small box tucked away on the top shelf. Inside were old photos of us, letters I'd written to her during our early years, and a journal. Flipping through its pages, I found entries that painted a picture of a woman lost, confused, and desperate for something she couldn't even define. One entry stood out: I love Kurt, but I feel like I've lost myself. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I don't know how to fix them. I wish I could tell him. I wish I could undo everything. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. She had been broken, just as I was now. And in her brokenness, she'd made choices that destroyed us both. In the end, there was no justice, no closure. Only loss. Jenna was gone, and with her, the life we'd built. I had set out to punish her, to expose her, but all I'd done was unravel the fragile threads that held us together. Now, all that remained was silence. And in that silence, I realized the hardest truth of all: revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but its cost is always far greater than we imagine.